This is the Sassafras dishcloth Intarsia demonstration video. I have set up this pattern with two sheets right here, two charts. One is just your basic Intarsia chart, which you could also adapt for cross stitch or other color work or crafts, and that just basically has the location of the motif and it's just shaded in there. It's up to you to figure out how to apply it. I've also got a cheat sheet which has symbols and colors to differentiate where I suggest using different bobbins of yarn, and 3 places where I suggest using stranded color work instead of Intarsia, and that will make sense in a few minutes here. I am going to begin by casting on using Patton's Grace. This is a mercerized sport weight cotton. I'm using cotton because this is a dishcloth and so it's absorbent and it's washable. The downside to cotton is that it's not going to grip or be elastic in the way that acrylic and wool will be. It's also not going to bloom very much, and so when you're doing color work, you do like those attributes where the strands of yarn are going to adhere to each other a little bit and puff up. They're going to hide any gaps or distortions, change in tension, unless you've made too much of a distortion or a change in tension. But the wool and the acrylic work a lot better for color work generally. But for this application, a dishcloth, cotton is definitely the way to go if you want it to be functional. So that's what I'm using today. This is a crocheted mosaic dishcloth in the same yarn. This is one that I worked up, and I was working on figuring out the edging and how I wanted to do that, and I scrapped that idea. So I never put this one through the wash, and you can see how it looks right off the hook. It's very springy. This mercerized cotton has been treated with a caustic agent to make the fibers stronger and more lustrous. It's very different from your really splitty, kind of snaggy crafting cottons like the sugar and cream or the peaches and cream. This is the same pattern with the edging I decided to go with, and it has been run through the wash, and you can see that it's still got really good stitch definition, and it hasn't fluffed up and come together to fill in the gaps the way that wool and acrylic will, but it's got a nicer hand now. It drapes better, and it's just the stitches are a little bit softer and more puffy. So it is going to improve a little bit upon washing, but you're not going to see the kind of difference that you'll see in wool or if you run acrylic through the laundry or if you heat block it. So to start out with, I'm going to use the long tail cast on, and I'm going to cast on 42 stitches. For the long tail cast on, I'm going to pull off plenty of yarn here because I need a nice long tail. And I'm going to start with a slip knot. So I will make a U shape in the yarn, twist it over itself, and then bring that over the working yarn that's coming off of the ball. So I now have a circle with the working yarn forming a bar behind it. I'm going to insert my needle under that bar and snug that up. All right. So I've formed this teepee shape with my thumb and my forefinger. I'm holding the working yarn and the tail in my 3 fingers here. I'm going to pull it down, and with the needle I'm coming up from the yarn, coming around my thumb, and then going down behind the yarn, looped around my finger. And I need to adjust my light because I've got a shadow here. This isn't really helping. Let's try that again. Or we'll knock the camera over. Let's overbalance right here. New device, I'm getting my bearings. All right. So we're going to go up and then down. And we want 42 stitches. This is going to put a series of purl bumps on the back side of the needle. We are starting off with a garter stitch band at the bottom, and then we're maintaining the garter stitch for 4 stitches at each edge of the dishcloth so that it doesn't curl, because this is worked in stockinette stitch. It is possible to work Intarsia in garter stitch, if you were going to work this in the round, or if you wanted to start off with a knit row when you turned it over to work back, you could form this the opposite direction, beginning with the yarn coming off your finger back here, and you would be able to put those purl bumps on this facing side of your needle and have your knit stitches set up on the back side. There's my first cat hair in here. Good job. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Keep working this, count off 42 stitches. When you reach the end, work 6 rows of garter stitch, that's knitting across each side all the way to the end. And then we're switching to stockinette stitch with that band of garter. So effectively that means that on row 7 you are going to knit all the way back across, and then the following 8 rows you're going to have the stockinette stitch with the garter border. And we're actually going to begin the Intarsia portion on the wrong side, and that's so that we can maintain this background ball of yarn without cutting it when we get to this portion in between the leaves. It doesn't really matter if you wanted to set it up a different way when you're working Intarsia. You're going to be twisting the colors together on the back side, so whether you're doing that behind your work when you're working on the face of it, or right in front of you when you're working across the back, it's going to be the same amount of work, so it doesn't really matter whether you set it up to start on the front or the back side. And I have gone on ahead and wound off some little bobbins and or butterflies of contrasting yarn and the main color. I have several balls of this Patons Grace, so I'm just sort of working with all of the different ones that I've ended up with. But once you reach this portion, if you haven't already wound off your bobbins or your butterflies, or if you don't have a spare ball, this is where you want to stop and get that ready. So I'm going to meet you guys back when you reach this part right here, when you reach row 16, and I'll see you in a minute. Okay, I have completed row 15 and I'm ready to work back across row 16 and introduce this little butterfly of my contrast color and this leftover ball here of my main color. And that's so that I'll have that ball of the main color right here. And then later on, I'm going to cut that. I'll continue working the background with the main ball of the main color, and then pick up again with that second ball in this section here. That's how I have chosen to interpret this for Intarsia. I've also chosen to place the stranded sections here and here and here, where we've got these little divots, and we would end up with just 1 or 2 stitches per row with a new bobbin or butterfly of yarn, which I would definitely prefer not to do. I'd rather just strand those sections. But this is really up to how you prefer to work and what gets the result that you like the best, how to interpret this chart and translate that into the actual techniques that will work it into your project. So for this little cheat sheet that I've created, we're going to be working across the back side here, row 16. The first 4 stitches are knitted. Now the next 14 are purled with the main ball of the main color. I'm going to purl the first 13 of them and then use that final stitch to lock the tail of my new little bobbin of contrast color in, so that it's not going to create a gap later on. So purl 13. Okay, so for that 14th stitch, grab your contrast color bring your tail in underneath the yarn that you are already working with, and then bring your working yarn underneath the new color. We're going to insert the needle and then work the stitch, and as we're doing it, that's going to lock the tail of the new bobbin of yarn into that stitch. So it's time to drop that and begin working with my contrast color. There are 4 stitches in this contrast color, and then we switch to the new ball of yarn, which means I'm going to work the first 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3. And now once again, I'm going to lock the tail of this new ball of yarn. I'm going to bring it in underneath the working yarn, and then bring the working yarn up again and use it to form my purl stitch. Now I drop it, and I'm going to work all the way across. See, I just started to pull my tail out there. All right. I'm going to work all the way to the last 4 stitches, and then I will knit those stitches. Now, because I really had to get you started off with a bang on your next row, you're actually going to strand that contrast color over. It's not going to show, but you'll be locking the stitch a couple of times. You'll be locking the float in so that you can have that contrast color where you want it to be for the next row. I am already tangled, man. You have to be careful with Intarsia, especially when you're working with multiple bobbins of the same color. So not only is it going to just really tangle up on you as you go, if you've got multiple bobbins of the same color, you might accidentally grab the wrong one, and then you're going to have to pick all the way back to where you did that. Ask me how I know. But the effect is really great when you have these large patches of color, unlike stranded knitting, which works best with small geometric repeating kind of hatched patterns with just short sections or thin sections of your individual colors. And some Intarsia motifs don't require any stranding. Some of them are very geometric with nice smooth edges without any kind of intrusions of the background color. But there are other motifs that are very complex, and you'll do a big blend of the stranding and Intarsia. Sometimes you'll have a stranded or Fair Isle motif where there's a section that you'll decide that you want to work as Intarsia because it will be unattractive when stranded because of the very large section of one color. So having these 2 tools in your toolkit to work out in conjunction with each other is going to make a lot of motifs that wouldn't have looked their best if you had just one tool in your toolkit really shine. Well, I've got an untangled one, but it hasn't helped much with the other. So as we're working back across again, we're going to work with that second ball. And then when we get to the contrast color, it's going to begin 1 stitch further in. So the contrast color is going to begin 1 stitch further in, and then it's going to terminate at the same point that it began. But then I'm going to bring it behind the main color to get it to about this point, so that when I work back on the next row, I will have that contrast color where I want it to begin this portion right here. It is amazing how badly I have already tangled this yarn. I've got this back behind the camera here, very well interlocked. I feel like maybe I've invented a few new knots here today. This is quite impressive. Okay, I am back in business and I'm going to knit until I reach one stitch before where the contrast color ended last time, because the edge here is on the diagonal. And when I reach that point where the two colors meet, I am going to twist the yarns around each other in order to prevent an empty space. If you don't twist the yarns, then what you're actually doing is working separate projects on the same needle. They will not be connected. So this is the point where I need that green color to come in, that ginger color that I'm using right here. And I am going to bring the red, the Fiesta color over it and work that stitch now. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now with that 5th stitch, I am going to need to repeat that process. So what have I got here? Am I about to pick up the wrong yarn? I am. I was totally about to pick up the wrong yarn. Here is the correct yarn. So once again, I twist it so that as I am working the next stitch in red, I am locking the green and red portions together so that they will not be separate sections. And now I'm going to want to go on ahead and strand that contrast color behind. So every couple of stitches I'm going to catch my float as you would in Fair Isle knitting. Usually with Fair Isle you're using like 100% non-superwash wool, and you can go 5 or even some people do like 8 or 12 stitches without catching that float. But because this is cotton, it's not going to grip, because it's going to have an exposed back since it's a dishcloth, and because it's going to take some abuse because it's a dishcloth, I am going to go ahead and grab it just every couple of stitches here. That can cause the float to be visible more easily, but I'm working with function over form here. It's my priority when working a project like this. Okay, I'm going to drop that contrast color and work all the way to the end. Now coming back again, sorry, my microphone picks up the paper sounds really, really badly. So coming back again, we've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stitches of main color, then 3 of contrast color, then 2 of main color, then we're dropping that main color ball, and we'll be back to using our second bobbin of the main color on the opposite side. So we're going to have our 4 knit stitches, 10 purl stitches. We're switching colors. So that little stranded section is going to be visible on the back side. Like this, you'll see the stranding, you'll see the floats, and the other portions, you'll see this very tidy column of interlocking yarn. And here's another one where I've got some stranding, and then here's the Intarsia again. One, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8. Why did I bring that over so far? Oh well. 9. Okay, 10. And now we are going to work 1, 2, 3, and then with that same original ball of main color, don't pull it tight. We want to have enough enough slack in it that we are not distorting our fabric, because the knit stitches are going to stretch a lot, and if you don't allow the float to stretch that much, you're going to have a puckered portion of your fabric. So 1 and 2, and then we're done with that. We're actually going to need to strand it back again on the return row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we are back to working with our second ball of the main color, and we're going to need to lock that to prevent a gap from forming. And we're going to work to, woo-hoo-hoo. Look at that, I just grabbed my wrong color there. So we're going to work to 4 stitches from the edge and then knit to maintain that garter stitch edge. After we have carried that main color back again from where we were stranding it to form the lobe of the sassafras leaf, we're going to have nothing but Intarsia for the next several rows. I will strand the main color behind the top of the leaf here on row 24, and then it's all Intarsia again until you get up to the deep section here between the lobes of this leaf up here. So I'm going to just work back across here. And once again, we are switching colors, one more stitch closer to the right hand edge as the leaf expands in that direction. Okay, I'm going to bring the yarn around. And in a moment here, I'm going to be coming up on that main color, and I'm going to want to carry that with me back as I go. Where is that coming from? There we go. Trying to snug up some stitches as I go. I've got my main color, and I'm going to catch it a couple of times. Just the once will do. 1, 2, 3. Now I need to go ahead and lock that yarn again. Not yet. I've got one more stitch in green. Now I need to lock that yarn. So it's all Intarsia until we reach the top of this leaf right here. This is the mitten-shaped leaf. The sassafras plant is native to Southeast Tennessee and a large portion of Eastern North America. It's where the original root beer flavoring comes from, although it was discovered in the 70s that it is extraordinarily toxic, and so while it is still used in folk medicine, it is not FDA approved, and the process to get the saffron out of the plant and make it non-toxic to humans is extremely labor intensive and expensive, and so mostly you're getting artificial flavorings these days. It's a tree, and it springs up as saplings everywhere, and it has these unique 3 different leaf shapes that appear on all of the plants. You have the oval, and you have the mitten, and then you have this sort of a trident, this 3-pronged dinosaur foot. And so I selected it for this project because it's a plant that I grew up seeing everywhere, and I think it's a really pretty one, and I think it makes a really nice dishcloth. Here's my prototype. This one will give you a slightly bigger, more dishcloth sized one that should be pretty comparable to this crocheted one. And then after you've finished it, you'll come in and you'll do duplicate stitching to form the stems. So you'll just take your contrast color, bring it up in the center V of your stitch, and follow that stitch around. Start probably down here in the lower corner and work your way up. At the end, weave in your stitches, secure them pretty well, and then you can wet block if you want to. If you're using it as a dishcloth, it's going to get blocked pretty well just from use. Happy knitting!